Hello everyone, thank you for coming out here tonight. My name is Julia. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm on the events team here at Books Are Magic. Before we get started, just a few logistics for tonight. First off, we do ask that you keep your mask on at all times while at the event. We will be doing a hand-raised audience Q&A towards the end of the event, so start thinking of questions to ask and hang on to them. After the talk tonight, Sara is going to be personalizing books at the desk all the way at the back of the store. We also have additional books available to purchase up at the register where you came in. If you're joining us virtually on YouTube, hello. We'd love to encourage you to buy a copy of True Biz online using the link in the live stream description. And I'll add, if you do want a clearer view of the interpreter, we do have a few seats up front available, and you should feel free to make your way down. Okay. With all of that in mind, I'm so excited to introduce tonight Sara Nović and Hana Kim, who are here celebrating the release of Sara's new book, True Biz. True Biz follows three different characters at a residential school for the deaf. Charlie, who grew up in a hearing family and whose cochlear implant is failing. Austin, the golden boy of the school. And February, their headmistress who is trying to save both the school and her own marriage. True Biz debuted as a New York Times bestseller, and I can safely say the honor is so well deserved. Sara beautifully explores community and communication, creating a book that transforms the reader. It will teach you something, it will make you laugh, it will make you think about language in new ways. Both an intimately human coming-of-age story and a deeply political look into the deaf community, True Biz is already one of my favorite books of the year and one that we're so excited to celebrate with you tonight. Sara Nović holds an MFA from Columbia University, where she studied fiction and literary translation. Her first novel, Girl at War, won the American Library Association's Alex Award and was a finalist for the Los Angeles Times Book Prize. She's an instructor of deaf studies and creative writing and lives in Philadelphia with her family. And as I mentioned, Sara is joined in conversation tonight by Hana Kim. Crystal is the author of If You Leave Me, which was a Booklist Editor's Choice title and named a Best Book of 2018 by over a dozen publications. A 2022 Creative Capital Award finalist, 2021 Jerome Hill Artist finalist, and a 2017 Penn Robert J. Dow Short Story Prize winner. She teaches at Columbia University and in the Randolph College MFA program. So, without further ado, everyone please give a warm welcome to Sara and Crystal.
I think Sara's going to read for us.
I think Sara's going to read for us first. Do you want me to hold the mic?
Yeah, no, I think I'm okay.
Okay, so this is the first chapter, so you don't need to know anything. Mary Waters was 9 years old when she, in the middle of math class, in front of everyone, stabbed herself in the ear with a number 2 Ticonderoga. Their teacher had been chalking the 12 times tables up on the board, providing February a window in which to sharpen the pencil, the grinding drawing her classmates up from their daydreams, their eyes following her across the room toward the teacher's corner. February stepped unsteadily on the felted swivel chair, then planted herself in a wide stance on the desk and jammed the pencil deep into her left ear. The class let out a collective gasp, breaking their teacher from her blackboard reverie. She hoisted February, who was bleeding more than she expected, from the desk in a fireman's carry. February dripped a delicate trail of crimson all the way to the infirmary. After the nurse removed the graphite and determined the damage was superficial, she gauzed up the bleeding and took February across the hall to the principal's office, where the secretary produced a suspension form for, quote, violent and disorderly conduct unbecoming of its student. Then, once it was determined how exactly to contact her parents, she was sent home for the week. A cry for help, given what the principal had taken to calling February's, quote, family circumstances. Really, February explained to her father when he came to get her, she wasn't upset at all. She was just tired of listening to the times tables, the buzz of a broken light above her desk, the screech of metal chairs against the floor. He didn't know what it was like having to hear things all the time, she told him, and with that he couldn't argue. What had pushed February over the edge specifically was Danny Brown calling sing-song from the row behind her, "February's very hairy and she eats the yellow snow." Only deaf people would name their daughter February, she'd thought then. Certain months were acceptable for use as girls' names: April, May, June, and her name was undoubtedly the result of some miscommunication of these guidelines. But February's parents had always preferred winter, the silent splendor of snow clinging to the chinquapin oaks, and in the deaf world of her childhood, beauty was taken in earnest. Her parents' friends weren't concerned with looking corny, and February had never seen any of them say something sarcastic. It was a world she disliked leaving, especially for such hostile territory as the 4th grade. "You can be deaf on the inside," her mother said that night when she tucked her in, "but you can never do that again." Of course, things are different now, February thinks as she looks out over the quad at River Valley School for the Deaf, squinting against the early sun. The internet has been world-opening for deaf people, and deaf culture has evolved to accommodate plenty of mainstream snark and slang. Plus, hearing people are naming their kids all sorts of weird things now. Fruits and animals and cardinal directions. The deaf world is no longer her safe haven, but her place of employment, and at the moment she is screwed. As headmistress, she is supposed to have her finger on the pulse of the school. Instead, she has done the worst thing possible. She has lost other people's children. 2 boys, Austin Workman and Elliot Quinn, a sophomore and a junior, roommates. In front of Clerk Hall, police have parked a mobile surveillance unit, Cincinnati and Columbus. They try to tap into the boys' GPS location, but this only leads them back to the dorms, where 3 phones are found in a neat stack beneath the common room table. The 3rd phone prompts another round of bed checks, but everyone is accounted for. Elliot's and Austin's parents arrive, yelling at a mix, demanding her office keys. An emergency alert will be blasted out to every mobile phone in the Tri-County, and February will have to speak to the morning news. She ducks into a lower school bathroom, pins back her hair at an unseasonably warm day for her namesake month. No snow in sight, sunlight refracting off dewy grass. It's such a nice lawn, meticulously kempt Eagleton bluegrass that looks vibrant, though it's not yet spring. A hardy species she chose personally because it would take the picnics and Red Rover games in stride. She has always done her best to make things as pleasant for the students as she can. She tries to steel herself for the press, to choose words that might tamp down the frenzy, or at least not add any fuel. Lost is wrong, she should say that. She hasn't misplaced them. They escaped, more like it, but that makes the school sound like prison. Runaways is charged with a certain angst, suggests abuse. Eventually she settles on gone missing, the passive obscuring responsibility. Superintendent Swall emerges and hands February the statement. 8x10s of Elliot's and Austin's school photos and a large mug. She stares at the pictures as she downs the coffee, both boys in button-ups, looking neat and agreeable, if not exactly smiling. Austin's eyes are the famous workman green, a light, almost spearmint color, and Elliot's are so dark they're almost black, and she tries to meet his gaze instead of letting her own eyes drift down to the scars on his cheek. For a moment, she is overwhelmed by the feeling that the boys are staring back, blinks hard to push the thought away. Then she hands her mug to Swall and steps up to the makeshift podium. When they go live, February holds up the photos first and puts them down so she can sign and speak her statement simultaneously. A short physical description of each boy, followed by the superintendent's message. The River Valley School for the Deaf is working round the clock with the Colston County Sheriff's Office and doing everything we can to bring our students back safely and as quickly as possible. If you'd see these children, please call the tip number on your screen. As she says the final line, her phone vibrates in her pocket. Distracted, she pauses for just a hair too long. The reporters leap in with their barrage of questions, largely unintelligible except for the one closest to her, who says, "Do you have any words about the welfare of the boys, given the nature of their handicap?" February bristles. Not the time for grandstanding, she knows, but she has to say something. "I'm concerned for the students' welfare," she says, "as I would be for any missing teenager." But if they can't hear, the students are intellectual equals to their hearing peers. Are they implanted? February is taken aback by the unabashed way he demands this information, but tries not to show it. I'm not authorized to divulge a minor's medical history on television, sir, she says. The reporter reddens, but isn't ready to surrender the limelight. Any evidence of foul play? Do you anticipate charges of a criminal nature? He pushes the microphone against her chin and gives her a sympathetic look that rings false around the eyes. If you'll excuse me, I have to go and speak with the police, she says. She steps away from the podium, but the reporter's face will not leave her. He's right. Elliot and Austin are not as safe as they would be if they were hearing, though not in the way the man had meant it. What if a patrolman finds them and shouts for them to stop, but they keep running? Or if they do need help, but they have no way to call the police? What if everything ends well and they return unscathed, but Child Protective Services uses the incident as an in to throw their weight around in the cochlear implant debate? She's read about it happening in other states. February has to bite her lip to cut the panic short. She's getting ahead of herself again. She checks her phone. Text was from Mel. You okay? She doesn't know how to respond. She shoves the phone back in her pocket and looks up to find another parent, Charlie Serrano's father, leaning against the police RV. Dr. Waters, he says, his voice much smaller than his frame suggests. Not now, she wants to scream. Yours is a mess for another day. But she holds it together and says, Mr. Serrano, we're in a bit of a situation. The campus is closed today, so you can take Charlie on home. He blanches. You mean she's not here? No. Is everything okay? It's just, it looks like she snuck out last night and she's not with my ex, so I thought maybe. He sweeps his eyes across the quad. Holy shit, she says under her breath, 3 cell phones. What? Says Charlie's father. He shifts his bulk against the vehicle, wrings his hands. I'm just going to, February points to the police insignia plastered above them. Give them a quick update. Wait, just a moment, sir, really, she says. Then she rounds the camper and vomits her coffee onto its front tire.
That was beautiful. Thank you, Sarah. Hi, everybody. I'm so excited to be here with Sarah. Can everyone see and hear? Does anyone need to change seats or anything like that? No? Okay. Well, congratulations, Sarah, on this beautiful book. Congratulations on the New York Times bestseller. I loved this book so much, and I'm really excited to talk to you about it and to just have everyone learn more about this book. True Biz is about deaf culture, community, language, selfhood. It's about teenage young love, the angst of middle age. There's activism in here. It's a really wonderful book that feels like its own world. So I'm very, very excited to talk to you, and I have a lot of questions. I wrote them all down because I didn't want to forget. So I want to start with the characters. There's Charlie, the Serrano girl in the excerpt, who is a deaf girl who is a new transfer to River Valley School for the Deaf. She has hearing parents, a cochlear implant against her will. Her mother insists on it, and she has not learned ASL before. So this is her first kind of introduction as she enters the school. And then there's Austin, who's a golden boy of this school from many generations of deaf parents and grandparents. And then there's February, who you were in the perspective of in the excerpt, who is a CODA, a child of deaf parents, and she is the headmistress. And they are our 3 main characters. And I'm so curious how these characters came to you and why you decided to use their plot lines in this story, because they're very diverse, and it gives us all these different glimpses into this community.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
I think, can I?
Yeah.
Will you hold it?
Yeah.
Can I? Maybe. Okay, so I think
Do you want to go with this?
maybe, yes?
Cool.
Okay.
I'm the interpreter, so I can sign.
I know, but I can't stop myself. I
A
feel
little bit.
weird
Right?
not signing. Yeah. Okay. So this book started as short stories, and Charlie was a short story because I read a newspaper article about a cochlear implant company that was getting sued because they knew that their implants were broken, but they continued to sell them, and some of them are having really bad, like, physical, dangerous things happening to them. And so I read that and I thought a lot about, like, why didn't anyone know this was happening? And then also was like, what would that, like, feel like inside your head? That was, like, the fiction writer part of me. Like, the activist part of me was like, what the fuck? Like, why does, like, no one know about this? And then, like, my fiction brain was like, I want to know, like, what that feels like. So that was Charlie. And then Elliot, who you kind of meet later in the book, was a short story that was very contained. And then, like, I wrote out, like, 100 pages of his story. And then I, like, cut most of that back out of the book. But that happened. And then Austin, I just kind of created because, like, multi-generational deaf families are a really important part of the deaf community, and they have, like, the responsibility of carrying on the language in a way, because most deaf kids, their parents are hearing and they don't sign with them. So, like, that's just, like, how the community functions. But also, really, that character started because I wanted to write a story about, like, if a kid was born hearing and everyone freaked out, the way that if a kid is born deaf, most families freak out. So it was just, like, kind of started a little bit as a joke almost, and then, you know, he became hopefully a full character in the story.
He did.
So I'm curious, because you said they started as short stories. Is that how you usually come to a novel? Is that how your first novel came to you? Or when you had these 3 short stories, did you realize I can braid them together?
Yeah, I think that's, like, my brain's way of tricking me into writing a whole book, because if I, like, sat down and knew, like, okay, this will be 7 years of your life, I'd be like, no thanks. Do you do the same?
I usually, well, with the first book, I started with stories for sure. And then with the second book, which I'm working on now, I started it knowing it would be a novel. But it's still taking longer than I thought.
That was my first book too. It was a short story, and then I was like, okay.
Yeah.
And this was, like, a few characters, and I was like, what happens if these 2 people meet, you know? And then it kind of became a bigger thing.
You mentioned how when you read this article about cochlear implants, a part of your brain, your activist brain, was like, what the fuck, this is messed up. And then part of your brain was thinking, what would it feel like? And so I'm curious, you write a lot of essays about deaf culture, and I think you are known as a deaf activist as well. So how did you decide to approach this through the lens of fiction? Or why or when?
Yeah, I don't think I really decided in, like, a way that someone makes decisions. It just, like, started happening because I wanted to write about deaf people, not like, okay, now I'm going to do this to show people things. But then it became clear kind of quickly that I was going to have to do some teaching in the book, because, like, just, like, the baseline knowledge for the deaf world for most hearing people is, like, nothing. So I resisted that a lot, and thankfully I had a really good editor who, like, forced me to teach more than I wanted to. But then when I realized also that I was like sat at a deaf school, like I could use that as an opportunity to make the educational parts feel less like preachy, hopefully. So I think, yeah, that was like maybe the hardest part about writing this book was like finding that balance between making sure people understand things, but also still writing good story, but then also still leaving a little bit of work for a hearing reader to do so that they're not fully comfortable, because it's not their world, right? It's a deaf world. Everyone in that school is deaf.
Yeah.
So it's like, you need to do a little bit of work.
Yes. I totally know what you mean. And I think this is a great time to bring up the guides in the book. So for those of you who have not yet read True Biz, since it just came out, there are these wonderful illustrated guides, which I think is what you're talking about when you said you needed to kind of show readers who don't know much about the deaf community or deaf culture more about ASL and its history and the history of deaf communities. So I wanted to show an example. So here's an example from page 79, Visual Syntax and the Art of Storytelling. And it provides these little mini lessons on signing or deaf culture and their illustrations. And I thought that this was a wonderful way, and you integrated it into the story because it aligns with Charlie, the transfer student who never learned ASL. She's learning about her culture for the first time, and so the lessons show up when she is learning about it in school. So it works really well for the reader, and it doesn't feel like you're catering, but it also provides a history or a foundation for people who don't know much about deaf culture, which I will say I didn't know much about this culture. So I wanted to hear more about, so did the guides come later? And I wanted to hear about the illustrations from Brittany Castle, because they were really wonderful and show the kind of movement of ASL.
Yeah, so I knew kind of early that I wanted to have ASL on the page in the book, but I didn't know how to do that without making it, really flat. So the two ways that I decided I tried all kinds of really crazy things that did not work. And then eventually I set up this system of ASL dialogue using different spaces on the page. People speak from different places in the same way that if I was signing and telling you a story and I'm setting up people and then I point back to that person, you remember as the listener who that is. That happens in the book with the dialogue itself. But also I wanted more than that, so I knew that I wanted illustrations, and I'm just like a really big fangirl of Brittany, her art. She's a beautiful artist. So I asked her, I was like, hey, will you draw 100 signs for me, please, for this project? And she said yes, thank God, because I don't know who else could have done this job. It needed to be a deaf person, obviously.
Yeah.
But I think, we would get on FaceTime and be like, I need a picture that will explain classifiers, for example, and I was like, do something with a car. And she's like, okay, draw, perfect, the first time, and if I had any other person, I think it would be hard or impossible to make that work.
Yeah. I think that it adds this formal element to the novel that I've never seen before, which I thought was really cool. I wanted to show an example of the way you show how people are signing too, which is what you were just talking about. So this is an example from page 284, but I think there are 3 people talking. And you can see by the columns, and it's very easy to track and understand who's speaking, even though it's not saying this character is signing here, this character is signing there. And you can kind of tell whether someone's signing. This is 3 people, which I think is difficult to do with any kind of conversation that you put on the page. So to do it with these columns, I thought you just did it so well. And you did it in a way where the reader is not confused about who is speaking, which I thought was really kudos to you.
That it worked.
Yes. What are some of the examples of things you tried that didn't work?
Oh my god. So, I mean, the first thing that kind of pops up in people's minds when they're thinking about ASL and English and the differences between the two is like the syntax, because ASL and English, the syntax is really different. It's basically backwards, you know, a lot of the time. So I thought, if you use that, it will be clear when someone is signing and when someone's speaking, yes, but it's not doing the job of teaching the hearing person the value in ASL, which is in the clarity, especially for the deaf characters. It shouldn't look like broken English. It should look better than English. So, yeah, I think I got rid of quotation marks for the spoken English, and I was like, you can work to figure out who's talking there. And then in the ASL, it will always be very clear who's talking, and that they're signing. So that was my like plan. But so yeah, the syntax I tried, no good. I tried this really like weird thing where I was like, I don't even remember what the rule was, but it was using space, but it was before I like figured out this. So it was like related to the space where you sign the individual sign. But so then the sentence itself was like, I was like, what the fuck? Like, it wasn't giving you any information at all, really. I remember I was talking to someone about like maybe different colors or something, but like, you know, in the end, I feel happy with the system as it is. It's still like not perfect in, you know, displaying ASL, obviously, but I think it maybe teaches a hearing reader something new.
I think it does too, and I think you did it really well, because as just any reader, you can read and feel immersed and understand what is happening in the situation, which I feel like is something that all writers are striving for. And I also wanted to dig in a little deeper to the ASL as its own language, and how you have all these different characters. We have Charlie, February, Austin, Elliot, Kayla. There's so many characters, and they all have very different backgrounds and different relationships to ASL and when they learned ASL. And for me, Charlie was the one who I felt for most, because she was given a cochlear implant when she was young, because her mother insisted on it, and then her parents didn't teach her ASL in the hopes that it would make her learn spoken English. But I think portrayed her frustration and the way her world opens up when she transfers to River Valley and starts learning ASL. So I wanted to learn more about how Charlie came to you, and when you learned ASL, and if your experiences influenced the book in that way.
Yeah, I mean, Charlie, her experience is not typical in some ways, because she has a broken implant that's really dangerous, but it's also very typical in many ways, because most of the time, the medical community will tell a parent who is hearing, 90% of parents of deaf kids are hearing, they give you a baby, they're like, I'm so sorry, this baby's broken, but don't worry, we can fix. And part of that is like, you can give them a cochlear implant, but if you choose that, you shouldn't sign. It's very old-fashioned information. It's not true, but it's still something that's very prevalent in the medical community. So that part of Charlie's experience is very typical for many deaf people. Like, I think only 8% of parents of deaf kids learn enough sign to have a two-way conversation with their kid. So it's really, really small. For me personally, I was not born deaf. I was born hearing and lost my hearing around middle school. So I was in mainstream school and just like trying to pass. And you know, I didn't know other deaf people, so I understood myself the same way that hearing people understood me, which was like broken person. And then finally when I met other deaf people and learned ASL, I was like, oh, not broken person, just a different kind of person. And I think people like don't understand the social and emotional part of language enough. Like, they're thinking, I mean, there's also the educational problems that come with language deprivation, of course, but you know, people who are quote unquote successful in learning English or whatever is still many times feeling isolated or missing this part of their identity that they don't even know exists. I think for me, I would not be a writer without ASL. I think it sounds funny maybe because ASL is not a written language, but without ASL, I don't think I understand myself as a person who has a story to tell. So for me, that's like the most value is in the community and like the sense of understanding myself through that community.
I think something that really made me feel a lot was Charlie thinking that she was a broken person because she transfers to River Valley so late, and the way her mother reinforces that message in many ways. We understand Charlie's mother loves Charlie, but the way she insists on refusing to learn ASL, thinking that it's weird, insisting on the cochlear implant, that was you portray such a complicated relationship there. And I think that really made me feel so much for Charlie, especially as a new mother. And also through Charlie and her mother, you go into this, what you write as the culture war, or like capital T, capital E, the end, and how within the deaf community, many are afraid of the end of their community via technology and cochlear implants. And this is something that I did not know about until reading your book. So I'm curious, can you tell us more about that culture war and why you decided to infuse the book with that theme?
Yeah, so Charlie and her mom, they have a really complicated relationship, and I think actually maybe it's the most universal part of the book, because they're just a mom and a teenage daughter in a lot of ways, where they're like, the mom doesn't accept her for who she is, but everyone or most people probably experience that in their lives with their parents at some point.
Yeah.
So I think that part of it is very like, hopefully something that many people can empathize with. But yeah, with respect to like the end of the deaf world, I mean, that's the problem with the culture that is transmitted horizontally, right? Between peers and not from your parents. It's not something that's passed down, except in like a really specific case like Austin's. So yeah, there is a danger of like, if no one learns sign language anymore, like, is that the end? Or now we see science trying to just like remove deafness from genetics completely. So like, just like delete deaf people. That's really something that they're working on. So to me, that's always been something that scares me as like an idea, that we can just take out different kinds of people from the world. I don't like it, and I always like make a half joke that like, I hope I'm dead before that happens, but they're working really hard on it, so I don't know. It could happen that I see that day, which sucks.
Yeah, that does suck. And that's something that I didn't know that was even happening, or that scientists are trying to edit the gene, or however they do it. And I think that that's an issue that is important, and that you weave into the novel in such a natural way through the conversations that these characters are having. And this, speaking of deaf culture and community and how it's, you said, transferred horizontally, brings me back to River Valley, because this school is a community. It's a hub. It's like this safe space for these characters, and it felt like a character in and of itself, River Valley. And there's early on a fear that the school might close, and at the end of the book, you list all of these schools for the deaf that have closed. So I wanted to just hear more about the decision to center the book in this specific space.
Yeah, I think schools for the deaf were really important because they function kind of like a homeland would for other cultures, right? Because deaf people are coming from all different backgrounds, classes, races, places. There's no like place from which deaf people come, but the deaf school is the safekeepers of the language and the culture, and that's why I really wanted like to kind of showcase that. And that list at the end of the book is a list of real schools that have closed, because I think it's important. Like, obviously this school I made up, but this function of the school is real. And yeah, if you don't know ASL, maybe you don't know about the last chapter is told from the perspective of the school. That sign at the top of the chapter.
I was wondering what that was, but I didn't know. Oh.
So that's a cheat code.
I was wondering what that was, but I was okay not knowing. That's.
Yeah, you don't need to know, but it's a bonus.
Yeah. I was okay understanding I'm a hearing person. I don't know what that is, but your readers who know ASL will. Oh, wonderful. Wait, I want to check on the time. Do I have time for one?
Yeah, one more question.
Oh, now I have to make it a good one.
No pressure.
I'm like, I have lots of questions. I'll do this one, just because I think it's a good way to round it out. True Biz as the title. That phrase comes in throughout the novel, but how did you decide that as the title?
I fought for it with my very blood. No, I always wanted True Biz to be the title because as a reader, I like when I can see the title in the book.
Yeah.
And I like see it on the page and the meaning changes.
Yeah.
I also like it as a sign. I like that it doesn't really have a direct translation into English. Like it has a few things it can mean, but it's not like one thing. So I like that about it. And yeah, it's really deaf. It's a fucking deaf slang. Like, so I wanted that on the front of the book, and
People are very happy.
people were worried about that because they were like, "Will people think it's a business book?" So I don't know, maybe, but I'm happy that it stuck, and it's like, yeah, all deaf people and people who know ASL will recognize it as like that. So I like that.
I think it's a wonderful title, and I didn't think it was a business book. I didn't know what it meant, but I was excited to read and find out.
Cover helps.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, that was my last question because we want to make sure we have time for Q&A, but I just want to say this is such an incredible book, and I hope all of you read it. It's wonderful, and congratulations again, Sarah.
Thank you so much for your good questions too.
Thank you. And we're going to open it up a little bit for questions from the audience. I know it always takes like 10 seconds until someone warms up, and then they'll ask it. And then I will repeat it since I have the mic.
So there's 4 schools listed in the dedication, and I was just wondering what her relationship is to those schools.
There are 4 schools listed in the dedication, and the questioner was wondering what your relationship is to those schools. It's the dedication is for the students at Rocky Mountain Deaf School, Pennsylvania School for the Deaf, Florida School for the Deaf and the Blind, and St. Rita School for the Deaf, and for deaf people everywhere.
Yeah, so 2 of them, Florida School for the Deaf and Blind, and the Rocky Mountain one, were places that I visited when I was on book tour for my first book.
Oh.
And like I had book club lunch with the students, and we talked about like why it's important for deaf people to become writers and read a lot. I just like really had the best time with them, and also, you know, they inspired a little bit of River Valley too. So that was to them, and then PSD is my hometown deaf school in Philly, and I've been like trying to go there since I moved back to Philly, but you know, the pandemic is like open, you know, so we've Zoomed a little bit, but I haven't been in person yet, so hopefully soon. And the last one is in Cincinnati, St. Rita's School for the Deaf, which kind of started this book in a way because I was living near there. I was feeling really weird. I'm not good out in Ohio. I'm like a hard East Coast person, so I was like feeling really, really strange living there. And I bumped into these girls, and they like had definitely like snuck out of the dorms at night and just like started chatting with them on like on their lawn, and we're like, oh, they're like, oh, you came from New York, like I want to go to New York one day. And I just like felt at home again, and that's the feeling that I wanted to write about in this book, was like deaf joy, you know, not only deaf trauma or something, but also like that sense of community that you can meet a deaf person wherever you are and be like connected.
And there is a lot of joy in this book, and a lot of like teenage antics, which is so fun. You know, just universal teenage like fun and lots of sex, and not, you know, a decent amount of sex and fun. Yes.
Do you think that you're going to continue to write more stories about deaf culture after this book?
Do you think you're gonna continue to write more stories about deaf culture after this book?
Yeah, I mean, I think this book is very focused on deaf culture in a specific way, and part of that is because of the school setting. But definitely, I think deaf characters will be in my books till I die. Yeah, I mean, many people have already asked me, like, will you write a second book, like, related to this book, because the ending, they wanted more. But, no. No, but more deaf people, yes, definitely.
I think sequels are hard in any, in any capacity. They're hard to write about. Other questions? Yes, all the way in the back.
I love the scenes with February and Wanda, watching them sort of have this chemistry between them and communicate. I think was really fun, and it reminded me that there are just like so few portrayals of deaf folks communicating with each other, just like in general. But I liked their chemistry and how they cute together. So I'm wondering, were there any like portrayals that you had seen that you were trying to avoid when you were writing this book, like portrayals of deaf characters that you felt like adamantly this cannot be in my book?
The question was, I loved February and Wanda's relationship, which you'll have to read to, find out more about. And the question was, were there any deaf characters or storylines that you were adamantly against writing about in this book?
Thank you. I think for me, I had not seen deaf characters in a book. Growing up, definitely not. I think maybe the first time was in grad school. We read The Heart is a Lonely Hunter. And that was a tough first time. I was like, a deaf character? Wow! But then all the deaf people go crazy and die in that book. And I was like, oh. So, yeah, I wanted to avoid that.
Yeah.
I think one thing I decided to do purposefully was to make Charlie a sexual person, because I think a lot of times we see deaf and disabled characters who are very like innocent and pure or like childlike, and that's bullshit. So that was something I was thinking about purposefully, but most of the characters I just wanted to be full people, and that's the trick for any book, not just a deaf story. But yeah, I think people who have agency, independence was important to me. Sex. Not all go crazy and die. Those are the goals.
Other questions? Yes.
I was really taken by a different relationship, a platonic one between Slash and Charlie. And the way he also sort of educates her, even though he's hearing and not a part of the deaf world. And I'm wondering if you can speak to like what you wanted to accomplish in writing that relationship, and why you included Slash and what it was like to write.
I'm sorry, are you saying Slash?
Slash. Yes.
Yeah, sorry. That's the character's name.
Yeah. The question was, I loved Slash and Charlie's relationship, and Slash is, but you were more interested. Platonic. No, I know. It's Charlie's like ex, current hookup buddy, punk rock guy, And you were saying why, what was your reasoning behind including Slash? And he does educate Charlie in I would say like activism, in like an extreme go off the grid way. And so what was the idea behind that plot line?
Yeah, so it started, I mean, a little bit personal when I was like a teenager. Part of my like self-searching phase was like, I'm gonna go to all these punk concerts and I'm just gonna put my face against the speaker. Like that, I liked that for some reason. Teenage brain. But yeah, the way that it started in the book was like, historically, deaf clubs had physical spaces and they used to rent them to punk bands. And so the way that it started in this book was, now this is cut out, but Charlie saw a poster that said Deaf Club and she thought it was a deaf club. And so she went and it was like this punk show and that was how she met Slash. But yeah, I just had fun writing that character, and so he became a bigger and bigger part of the story, and I thought it was interesting for Charlie to have, again, her independence and be out in the world, and access this information that's like a little bit off. He's like teaching her stuff, and some of it's good and some of it's like,
Yeah.
and just to kind of see what she does with that, plus the stuff that February is teaching her, and it like kind of gets mixed up in this like a little bit wrong-headed, but like you can totally see how it would make sense to a teenager way. So I think that, yeah, those two characters, Slash and February, together kind of give her this idea that they didn't maybe Slash meant to give it to her, but yeah, most of it I just have fun writing him as a character.
I will say, when you read the books, the different plot lines come together so well at the end. And as a writer, just thinking about process, I thought you know, like wove them together to such a like satisfying ending. So I will say, just look out for that. Do we have time for another question? Yes. Question?
My question actually kind of goes off of what you just said.
Mhm.
I thought that the variety of perspectives and plot lines was so fascinating and something that really drew me in. But I'm curious what you think might have been lost if you had used an omniscient narration or something more just overarching between all the characters instead of each of their individual perspectives and plot lines.
So the question was, I loved the diversity of characters and perspectives because it's close third. And the question was, what do you think would have been lost if there was an omniscient narrator rather than the close third perspectives?
Yeah, I think we lose a lot for Charlie, in particular, because she's kind of like the tour guide because she doesn't know anything. So I wanted that character who didn't know that much to help you, or to help hearing people understand the deaf world better. But yeah, mostly I just like playing with the character. I mean, it's all third person, but like playing with the characters' voices a little bit. Their perspectives are all a little bit unique, and I wanted to show also that deafness is not just like a monolith. You know, it's not just like deaf person. You know, that's it. There's many, many, many kinds of deaf people, and really diverse experiences of deafness and of being alive in general. So that was important, and I wanted to use the voices to give them a little bit more individuality that way.
Yeah, and I think that's important. Like any culture, there's no culture is a monolith. So I think that the close third really helps show you all these different types of characters. I think we have time for another question. Yes?
Yeah, one last question.
If there is one. I think I saw a hand.
Very timid. I found it interesting that some of the relationships portrayed, there was sort of a running theme throughout about that monogamy isn't necessarily the answer, and I was wondering if that was, did I make that up? Is that something that you intended?
Okay, the question was, I felt like there's a theme that monogamy is not always the answer. Is that something that you intended to include, or did I make that up?
Yeah, I think it was intended, especially for Charlie. I mean, first of all, she's a teenager, right? Yeah. But I just wanted to shift the focus, like not focus so much on like, will Charlie pick one of these guys to date or something? Like that wasn't interesting to me as a story. For me, both of those relationships give something to Charlie that she learns about herself. That's more interesting. So that was like what I decided to follow, and then I kind of saw that parallel happening in February's life too. I see those two characters as foils for each other, so that just kind of started happening more and more. Like I set them up that way, but I surprised myself, so that was cool. I mean, that's the best part of writing, really. If you don't surprise yourself, then you would never finish a book, probably. You just like get bored and leave, or I would.
Me too. Well, thank you everyone for your questions and your attention, and I believe there's more.
Yeah,
Or
I'm
is-
just gonna
okay.
say a few words
Okay.
to close us off.
Yeah.
Thank you. Want to thank everyone again. Thank you both. As a reminder, Sarah is going to be personalizing books at the back desk. So, but let's wait to approach the desk until she's gotten settled back there. If you'd like to purchase a copy or purchase additional copies of True Biz at the front where you checked in, as well as Crystal's book, If You Leave Me, you can do so up there. For those still with us on YouTube, thanks for joining us. You can find the link to purchase books in the description. For those in store with us, we do ask that after you've purchased your books, you do make your ways downstairs so our staff can start to break down this space. And we'll unlock that back door and you can exit there as well. That's all for me. Thank you again, everyone, and let's give these two one last round of applause.
Also, can I say, Crystal's book is amazing. I inhaled it like when it first came out, so if you're like looking for a good read.